So there's different spectrums of dosing for methylene blue. On the lower doses, you're getting this mitochondrial redox. You're getting the energy and detox. But as you increase the dose, you can compensate for more significant potential mitochondrial dysfunction.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together.
Today on The Less Stressed Life, I have Dr. Scott Sherr, who is a board-certified internal medicine physician, certified to practice health optimization medicine, and a specialist in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. He is the COO of Troscriptions, a line of physician-formulated pharmaceutical-grade and precision-dosed buccal troches containing novel ingredients like methylene blue, agarin, and others in formulas for energy, focus, sleep, stress, immune support, and more. These are all my literal favorite topics. So I told him off air, there's probably more than one podcast episode here because we need a tangent on hyperbaric oxygen therapy another day. But today we're talking about methylene blue, which is maybe one of the sexy things of the last couple of years. So welcome
At least
to the
it's
show,
very blue.
Dr. Scott.
So
Yeah.
it's very blue. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic topic and I'm excited to dive into with you.
Yeah. I want to hear about how you got into product development. I especially always enjoy stories of how people end up kind of diverging off of their traditional path and how they land in something. And I do think product development is a different beast, honestly. I don't think you just wake up one morning and you're like, there is this gap in the market, I'm going to do it. I think there's actually a little bit of a mountain to climb there. And I can tell from the delivery systems that there is some real intentionality behind this. I think with we've only really covered delivery system here once or twice, majorly. And so I think that there's going to be a conversation for that as well. So just give us a little bit of the background and the story and how you went from being, I don't know, maybe an MD practicing to getting into product development in the supplement industry, which feels like you're a black sheep.
I have a pretty interesting story, I guess. My dad's a chiropractor. So I grew up very out of the box and he sells supplements in his office. So they've always been in and around my ecosystem since I was a kid. And so it was always great for him. He'd have people come into the office and have the ability to immediately give them some supplements that would help them very quickly along the way. So I grew up very out of the box in the chiropractic framework, which is the body can heal itself if you give it the right tools. And oftentimes pharmaceuticals are not necessary, especially if you're doing more preventative care. So I thought about becoming a chiropractor actually for a little while, but I ended up deciding to go into medical school because I had the high-minded idea that I could bridge this huge gap or the chasm between, at that point, there was no such thing as functional medicine. It was just either conventional medicine or it was alternative medicine. There was really nowhere in between. So I always call people like my dad and others in the chiropractic world that were like him, although there's very few as intensively crazy as he is in a lot of cool ways, the OGs when it comes to functional integrative medicine, really. And so I had this high-minded idea that I could do this. Product, they really weren't in my view at that point. When I went through medical school and residency, I gravitated to a field called hyperbaric oxygen therapy, as you mentioned earlier. So this is a technology that helps with healing, optimization, performance, et cetera. And so I got into the world of hyperbaric medicine. Then I got into the world of understanding that hyperbaric medicine was a great tool. The chambers were fantastic, but you really needed a foundation to be able to do that. And so I was initially referring out to people, my friends and colleagues, but then I met a colleague in 2017 that had started a nonprofit called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And this was a nonprofit that was training practitioners, still is now, on how to optimize health rather than treat disease. So instead of functional medicine, which focuses on root causes of illness, the framework shift here was that health optimization focuses on the root causes of health and that disease is managed and health is optimized. And those are good slogans, but the idea really is that you're looking at foundational biology, foundational health markers, cellular health, gut health, immune system health, neurotransmitter health, hormones, and then looking at circadian rhythms and toxins in our environment. And I can go on. But that became the foundation of my clinical practice. And a lot of that clinical practice became focused on optimizing lifestyle behavior and supplementation. And that company, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, I signed on to be the COO of it, and it's a nonprofit organization. And that company, we decided we needed to start creating products that could help people right now while they're on the longer path to optimizing their health. And what we need help with right now is pretty obvious for many of us, is that we need help with our energy. We need help with our focus. We need help with our sleep. We need help with our anxiety. We need help with our immune system. And because the path of optimizing our health takes a long time for most people. It's not like it's tomorrow that you feel better. It's a process. So what are the things you can do along the way to help? And that's where transcriptions came about. That's where Methylene Blue became our first sort of main products that we developed. And that's how we designed and developed the dosage form called the buccal troche, which is the way we deliver the ingredients in our products.
Was this all somewhat recent?
So the nonprofit got started in 2017, and that's Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or Home Hope for short. And I'm a faculty over there. We do education for practitioners, and licensed and non-licensed as well. And then in 2020, a month before the pandemic, we released our first product at Transcriptions. And that was a focus product called Blue Canatine, which is a combination of methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, which is like your Adderall without the jitters for about 3 to 5 hours of focus without come down or crash. And these were developed for our patients, and then for us personally, who were doing a lot of traveling, a lot of speaking, and always needed to be on, et cetera, but wanted something that was going to be more supportive. And that's where Methylene Blue really came into play, significantly.
All right. And you were in private practice before, it sounds like, from the beginning.
I've done a lot of private practice in various ways over the years. I do a lot of consulting on the hyperbaric side. I used to work at various clinics as medical directors. I work with clinics all over the world that are looking to integrate hyperbaric therapy as part of their ecosystem in some way. And then I have my own concierge medical practice that I do remotely from my town outside of Boulder, where I see patients doing telepractice in the context of the nonprofit and that framework that we use.
Very fun. Keep it interesting, right?
I try to. I also have 4 kids and 3 other jobs, and I keep it busy.
You're like, I think I should put a lid on how many more things I'm going to say yes to right now.
I said that 4 years ago, and I've done a pretty good job. But the challenge with it is that since that time, the things that I've committed to 4 years ago have gotten a lot bigger, including transcriptions and my clinical practice. And that's all good. It's all good stuff. I really enjoy what
happens. That's what happens sometimes. And especially, I feel like, I don't know this 100%. My bias is I do feel like you're filling like a novel niche a little bit. Like you're certainly not the only Methylene Blue provider, but I think your delivery format is a bit interesting. And I would also say when we were looking for someone on Methylene Blue, you kept coming up and what do you do? So of course you're out in this, you're speaking about it. So here we are. I have friends that have developed product lines, one that does a really novel job. And I always hear about, I used to be very in the know on all of those sort of things that came up. So I'm sure it was really fun to launch right before COVID, but also probably worked itself out, gave you really an opportunity to focus on it at that time. And I know you just told us about your first product. Is that still a product that you use now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 6 or 7, I think, on the market now. But our focus in the beginning, we were the first product company to develop a consumer-facing Methylene Blue product, is what it comes down to. And that was in early 2020, before the pandemic. But certainly because of the pandemic, there was a lot more interest in what we were doing because of Methylene Blue and what it does in the cellular side, low doses, high doses, and we'll talk about all that, I'm sure. But the challenge with Methylene Blue, it took us actually 9 or 10 months longer to actually release our first product, because it took us that long to find a clean source of Methylene Blue. The challenge with Methylene Blue is that it can be contaminated. Even USP, even what's called pharmaceutical grade Methylene Blue can be contaminated. And so it took us a long time to find one that we could really trust. And that's really what it comes down to, is that there is a lot of Methylene Blue on the market now. There wasn't when we first started. We've tested a lot of this other stuff, and we're always the best stuff on there. And and the purity, number one, and then also potency. The potency in liquid especially is across the board, but it's not very consistent when you're getting a dropper of Methylene Blue as opposed to developing it in the way we have, which is in a buccal troche.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's pretend someone's coming to this podcast because they're like, I've heard of it, Methylene Blue, but I have no freaking idea what it is. What is methylene blue? What are its other names? And where did it start?
So methylene blue started as a dye. So it's a textile dye that was developed in the mid 1800s. It used to dye blue jeans blue, actually. And they actually realized that the class of dyes that methylene blue belongs to had antimicrobial properties. And this is in South Africa, actually. And in 1897, it was the first drug registered with the FDA as a pure synthetic ingredient. So this is not a natural compound. And some people don't like that. They're like, it's not natural. I don't want to take it. But the dose makes the poison always in whatever you're taking. And synthetic things there's a spectrum there, along with natural things, of course, as well. If you're foraging mushrooms, you eat the wrong ones, you can end up with liver failure. So not just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good for you either. Just to throw that out there, because I know some people have a problem with something that's synthetic. But so methylene blue was the first drug registered with the FDA, and the indication was actually for malaria. And what was really interesting about it, and it got this moniker at the time called the magic bullet, because what you could do is you could give very high doses of methylene blue and you could kill off organisms like malaria, but you would leave the human cells untouched or without any challenges or detrimental effect to them. And that was like the holy grail in treatment at the time, and really is to some degree now, where you could give something that will affect what you wanted to affect, in this case, something like malaria, but it wouldn't have a detrimental effect on the body itself. So it came in that realm, and then it was like really the primary antimicrobial around until the 1950s. So World War II pilots used to have to fly with it in the Pacific theater when they were fighting the war. It was used for urinary tract infections. It was used obviously for malaria and other bugs as well. Antifungal, it's a fantastic antifungal, but in the 1950s, all that went by the wayside because antibiotics and antimicrobials came around that were prescribed. And so the main side effect of taking methylene blue is that your urine turns blue. And so people didn't like their urine turning blue. And that's why it fell a little bit by the wayside, except in the world of aquariums. If you're an aquarium person, you would know that methylene blue is used as an antifungal, as an antiseptic in aquariums, and still is now. And so it was used in that capacity. And then it's also been used over the last now over 60 or 70 years as a cellular stain. What happens is that you can use methylene blue, and I used it in chemistry class back in college, because it actually concentrates the methylene blue in certain areas of the cell. And this is where it becomes interesting. It actually concentrates in areas where you have a part of your cell called your mitochondria. Your mitochondria are your cell organelle that help you make energy. And then over the last couple of decades, we now know exactly what's happening in our mitochondria when you give methylene blue. And there's a spectrum. At very low doses, you have certain effects, and at very high doses, you have different effects depending on what you're looking to do.
Okay, so we'll talk about what happens to mitochondria when you give methylene blue. But before, because it's synthetic, how is it made? Where does it come from?
It's made in a
Because
lab.
you mentioned something about South America, but then you were like, it's synthetic. And so I was expecting it to come from a plant. I have no idea where it comes from. Where does it come from?
It's a dye that's synthetically manufactured from other chemicals as precursors. Yeah. So it's not made from a plant directly at all.
How do you think it is so intriguing that they dosed this for so long and just continue to find uses for it? If you were one of the first people to use it as a supplement, mitochondria, what was the inspiration that you were going from? And maybe that kind of also lends itself to what happened. Well, the next thing will be, let's talk about the mitochondrial impacts. But like, how did you decide, man, this dye that no one uses seems like a great thing to put in our supplement? Like, what was the inspiration there?
As I was alluding to, there was new research in the last couple of decades showing that methylene blue concentrates in the mitochondria. And that concentration is not just so that we can see it on slides when we're looking at it with microscopes, but there are actually significant things that are happening in the mitochondria that are allowing the cell to work at a more efficient capacity. And some of the work that was done specifically on certain types of emergency conditions, what became very interesting. And like, these are things that would happen in emergency rooms. People would show up and they'd have something called methemoglobinemia, which is a condition where you can't carry oxygen on your red blood cells. And they found out that if you give methylene blue in these cases, you can actually make that happen. It's the antidote for this particular condition. And what's happening here? This is happening in the red blood cells. And then there's another one that's very interesting that I hope nobody ever gets, called cyanide poisoning. Cyanide is a poison that poisons one of the complexes on your mitochondria. And somehow they figured out that methylene blue is an antidote for this. It is a rescue so that if you get poisoned with cyanide, what happens is your complete electron transport chain in your mitochondria shuts down. But what methylene blue can do is can compensate for that shutdown and maintain energy production, not at a max capacity, but at a lessened capacity, but still enough to keep those cells alive long enough for the cyanide to wear off if you get it obviously early enough. So there was this initial interest in some of these emergency indications. And then there is a researcher down at the University of Texas, Austin, named Dr. Francisco Gonzalez Lima, who has done a lot of great work on methylene blue and neurodegenerative types of conditions and combining it with red or near infrared light as well, because there's synergistic capacity using those two things together in clinical practice.
Yeah. What a weird thing to end up researching. As they're like, we're just going to go for it. It's just a little bit of surprise. That's all. Right?
And the big thing of it too is that it's so far off patent, right? So the thing about methylene blue is that you can never come out with a blockbuster drug with methylene blue because it's been around such a long time. So studying things like this is not easy for researchers to do because there's no blockbuster drug at the end of the rainbow here. But because there has been his model, Francisco Gonzalez Lima, is an Alzheimer's model. And there's been some studies using methylene blue in Alzheimer's with some compelling benefits, which is very interesting. And I think it's happening in multiple ways where I think this is actually working. And this is where we can get into the details if you want of like how exactly it's working in the mitochondria.
Yeah. Let's go exactly how is it working in the mitochondria and tell us also what are the benefits that they're seeing in Alzheimer's models.
Yeah. So on the microscopic level, on what's happening in the mitochondria, methylene blue is what's called a redox cycler. And what that means is that it has this very cool ability to both donate electrons and accept electrons. Most things will do one or the other. They'll either donate electrons to the electron transport chain. These are things like taking NAD, for example, right? You take NAD, that's what you're doing. You're donating more to your electron transport chain and you're creating more energy. Either you're giving more energy to the electron transport chain, or you're, on the other side of things, you're an antioxidant. So you're picking up what are called free radicals, reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. But when we make energy, we also make more oxidative stress. And so typically things are either helping you make more energy or they're giving you more capacity to be like an antioxidant, like your vitamin C or vitamin D or zinc or something like that. So these are all antioxidants in some ways. So what methylene blue has the capacity to do is both at the same time. So if you need more energy, it can help you do that. If you need more detoxification and oxidative stress neutralization, you can do that using methylene blue as well. And the cool thing about methylene blue on the energy production side is that it can compensate for any dysfunction in the complexes that are a part of the electron transport chain in the mitochondria to help make energy. And so there's 4 complexes, complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. Complex 1 and 2 are the ones that are that are getting electrons directly from our food, NAD and FAD specifically. So you have a citric acid cycle, which is how we process our macronutrients into electrons so that they can go to the electron transport chain and make energy. So you have NAD and you have FAD. So if there is a blockage in either of these two complexes, you're not going to make energy effectively. But if you have methylene blue around, you can actually compensate for some of those blockages in various ways by donating electrons further down the process to complex 3 or complex 4, so that you maintain electron flow and you maintain the proton gradient in the mitochondria itself, And that as a result of maintaining that proton gradient, you're able to continue to make energy. That's why I think it's so effective and it's been studied now actually in things like traumatic brain injury and stroke models, mostly in animals, where if you give methylene blue acutely after you have one of these things, you can potentially rescue brain tissue or other tissue as a result of that. And I always tell my patients, the ones that I work with, that they should have a higher strength methylene blue available just in case they have an acute trauma, an acute episode like this, because there is a possibility that can rescue some of the mitochondrial function and prevent those cells from breaking down. And I think the final point there I would make is that methylene blue can act just like oxygen in the mitochondria as well. So oxygen is the final electron acceptor on the electron transport chain on complex 4. So methylene blue can do that same thing. So if you have less oxygen around, say like an ischemic event, or you're traveling to Colorado and you're visiting me and you're at 5,000 feet, there's less oxygen around. So you're not going to feel as good because you don't have as much of that electron acceptor. Methylene blue can compensate for that. And so we're using it in those contexts in clinical practice and really seeing some fantastic benefits.
Yeah, it does make sense where it would get the name Magic Bullet. As I think about that, I'm like, yeah, I also use this and this for that. But I think the big thing is that it's doing two things at once potentially, right? So it is improving energy while also compensating for drainage, detox, oxidative stress, essentially.
Exactly.
So it's acting like an antioxidant in the body a little bit.
It does both. I tell my patients all the time is energy and resilience. It's energy and resilience. So you get extra energy and you get extra resilience, which is your detoxification pathways.
Yeah.
And then at the higher doses, so there's different spectrums of dosing for methylene blue. On the lower doses, you're getting this mitochondrial redox. You're getting the energy and detox. But as you increase the dose, you can compensate for more significant potential mitochondrial dysfunction. But at the same time, it becomes, as I was alluding to earlier, significant anti-infective as well. So there's no resistance patterns to methylene blue, and which means that there's no bacteria, fungus, or virus that's resistant to methylene blue. And the reason why that's the case is that in the body, what methylene blue does at higher doses is it increases the amount of hydrogen peroxide that's produced. Now, hydrogen peroxide, we all know about what that is if you buy it at the store, but our body actually produces hydrogen peroxide to kill organisms. And it does this in a very defined, in a very specialized way. So at higher doses of methylene blue, you get more hydrogen peroxide production and you get more anti-infective capacity. Now, and at the same time, the more hydrogen peroxide that you produce, the more glutathione, your master antioxidant in your body, that you actually spur the release of, because hydrogen peroxide stimulates glutathione production. So you get a massive bump in glutathione production at higher doses of methylene blue as well. So there's a spectrum of dosing. Lower doses, like less than a half a milligram per kilogram, like 4, 8, 12, 16 milligrams for many people, can have significant improvements in the redox. And who has mitochondrial dysfunction? Krista, everybody does, right? 95% of the US population, most likely. And this is not severe all the time, but it could be mild to moderate if you've had an infection and you still feel fatigue, if you have inflammation in the body and it's not getting better, if you have an autoimmune problem. So we've just seen fantastic things in people with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and long COVID and conditions like that that are really difficult to treat, that where you bring methylene blue into the picture, fantastic. And I've seen people get better in 3 days that have been sick for 3 years in some cases. And that's not always the case, but when you find the right dose, which can take a little bit of time, that's when you can really see things shift very quickly in a lot of people.
Yeah, I've got so many questions, which is great. But first, since we're on dosing, I want to talk about dosing a little bit. And is there a negative to starting too high? I had a past client.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, who I just cannot remember the details around it, but I feel like there's something you have to watch out for with dosing with methylene blue. What is it?
Yes.
If you're urinating a lot when you're drinking water, maybe you're not actually hydrating that much. Or in other words, getting the fluid and nutrients into the cell. Electrolytes are minerals that help fluid and nutrients get into the cell. I recommend all of my clients start by drinking electrolytes when we begin our work together to improve energy. And then we get even more strategic with our electrolyte recommendations as test results come in. Now, generally, electrolytes are potassium, sodium, and chloride. One of my favorite electrolyte products is Pickleball Cocktail from Jigsaw Health, because it's one of the only products you can get with an adequate dose of potassium to meet my recommendations, which is critical for blood sugar, which everyone should care about, hormone health, and digestion. Huge thing for relapsing digestive issues. Jigsaw Health is also maker of the famous adrenal cocktail, made popular by the pro-metabolic corner of the internet and Root Cause Protocol, as well as a multi-mineral electrolyte for recovery called Electrolyte Supreme. You can get a discount on all of Jigsaw's amazing products, including Pickleball, Electrolyte Supreme, and Adrenal Cocktail at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's 3 S's, less stressed 10.
So one thing I didn't mention is that on the history of methylene blue, they found out that it had what's called a monoamine oxidase inhibition properties, which means that it could work to increase norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin in the brain. The first antipsychotic, chlorpromazine, was actually derived from methylene blue for this reason. Now, because it has that MAOI capacity, some people, when they start taking it, may feel it's a very non-medical term. Funny, right? Because the brain neurochemistry is going to change a little bit. But that's the word that I typically hear from clients.
I laugh, which is because, I understand completely. I feel funny.
something's just funny. So that's one thing you have to consider. Now, if you have patients that are on SSRIs, for example, there is a relative contraindication to using methylene blue, but that's really only the case if you're using IV methylene blue. If you're using oral methylene blue, it's very safe. Again, you just have to go slowly with the dosing. And if you're going to use methylene blue with SSRIs, I just recommend you do it with a practitioner being involved in your care and not doing it on your own that way. Now, where do we make most of our serotonin? Of course, it's not in our brain, but in our gut. So what will typically happen is these patients may have some GI-related stress. If they start off with too high a dose, and they're not used to that, those neurotransmitters being released, that's that funny feeling that people might get. The other thing that might happen as well is that if you start at too high of a dose, you may get more of a detox reaction than you're really wanting to have right away. And that's because I find methylene blue is very interesting that it's almost like an adaptogen in various ways. If you have more cleanup to do, it's going to do the cleanup first. If you have more energy enhancement, compensation for electron transport chain dysfunction required, it's going to do that first. So detox symptoms are not uncommon. So this could be
one of my questions.
Yes.
I was like, there's no possible way that this, I was like, oh, what about die-off? If this thing does all this other stuff, plus it's also acting as an antimicrobial of sorts, how could it not have this?
But the key, and that's why the key is to start off at low dosing for most people. And you titrate the dose. What I do as a clinician here is I titrate the dose every 3 to 5 days, depending on their response. So start off pretty low, sometimes 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, sometimes a little bit like 12.5, but I usually don't start off at a higher dose than that if somebody's had a chronic complex medical issue. Now, if they have an acute infection, it's a different story because the body will require more in general to see the benefit, and he will eat up that benefit quickly. And I think a good example of this is actually my mom, like about a month ago, was bitten by a tick. Okay. And so if you're bitten by a tick, this is obviously, she lives in New York and there's a lot of Lyme ticks there. So we wanted to give an antimicrobial dose here. So an antimicrobial dose of methylene blue is at least 1 milligram per kilogram or maybe higher, up to 3 milligrams per kilogram. So I gave her 2 milligrams per kilogram, which is 150 milligrams of methylene blue. And I was actually frankly scared because it was 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. And I was like, she's not going to sleep because the norepinephrine that's going to be released because she's taking an MAOI a little bit. But she felt great. She had no problem sleeping because she had an acute inflammatory episode with an acute infection. She needed the extra methylene blue and she did great. She had a fantastic 4 or 5 days on it. I didn't keep her on that high a dose. I went down to 1 milligram per kilogram after that, just after that first dose. So from an acute perspective, most people can tolerate more if they have an acute inflammatory condition, whatever it might be. But if it's a chronic issue, usually starting off at a lower dose is going to be better tolerated. And you go slowly and titrate up the dose over time. As they start seeing benefit, you can keep them at that dose. Or if you think that there might be a further way to go, then you keep going. It depends on what the goals are symptomatically. For example, it's more mitochondrial function, then you're probably going to stay at pretty low dose and see a benefit. But if it's more as an anti-infective, you may have to go higher overall. And that's why we developed 2 products at Transcription, one called Just Blue, which is 16 milligrams, and one called Tro Plus Blue, which is 50 milligrams, 50. And the Tro Plus is only available if you're a practitioner. So it's not available to the consumer because there's higher risks for taking the higher dose immediately if you're not ready for it, as you were describing, or taking it long term. There may be some detrimental benefits as well, which I can talk about. Mostly the detrimental benefit for higher doses over the long term is that we worry about your gut, actually, because it's an anti-infective, right? So you're also going to be killing off gut bacteria, which may be a good thing in the short term, but in the long term, maybe not what you want to do, right? It's decreasing the microbial diversity. There's also some potential that if you're taking too high doses for long periods of time, methylene blue has what's called a hormetic dose response curve, where it works really well up until a certain point. Then you go over that point, over about 3 milligrams per kilogram, then you become it's purely oxidative. So purely causing oxidative stress to the system, as opposed to energy and detox. It doesn't do that anymore. So those are some things with long-term higher doses that we have to think about. But in general, it's very safe and very well tolerated. The only other group that I do have some concern when I start methylene blue is those with significantly difficult to control hypertension, because their blood pressure can go up slightly when they take methylene blue, sometimes more than slightly if it's a higher dose. That's why certainly starting at a lower dose can be helpful. But on the reverse of that, if you have hypotension or positional hypotension, like POTS, for example, I have a lot of clinicians that are using methylene blue because it helps with the blood pressure in these cases. And I think that this is multifactorial, but certainly one of the reasons I think is that norepinephrine that's being released as MAOI. Another is that it's binding something called inducible nitric oxide in the blood vascular system itself, which gets released with infection and inflammation.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And just to give different words to him talking about hypotension or POTS, which is much more common post-COVID also, I also want to just speak to the person that's really frequent and was me, which has to do with your adrenals sucking, which is getting accolades at the doctor because they're like, oh, your blood pressure is low, which is exactly what he's saying. But often it's considered normal. So it's not necessarily that you are lightheaded when you stand up, the more severe version. But if you're just generally a little bit lower, might be really awesome, which would make sense because the main treatment for me for adrenal is mitochondrial support regardless.
Almost everybody. Yeah, most everybody needs your adrenals are highly concentrated with mitochondria. Like you have your most mitochondria there, you have your most mitochondria in your brain, in your heart, in your liver, and in your ovaries, if you have ovaries, or your sperm, or so eggs and sperm. Actually, eggs are the most mitochondria per cell of any cell in the female body or anybody really, or any human form. And this is one of the reasons why fertility has become such a huge challenge is that they're so mitochondrial dense and they need such significant mitochondrial support to grow a new human. And if you don't have that, you're going to see it in places where you have the most.
Body does not care. I actually need it for all these other places where you were depleting my mitochondria.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've had a number of stories of women telling us they got pregnant after starting Methylene Blue. Now, being pregnant, you should not take Methylene Blue if you are pregnant because it's not something you're supposed to take. But like in the lead up and like the fertility, that side of things, we've had a lot of great reports there, which is initially surprising to me. Then of course it shouldn't be surprising, right? If you're optimizing mitochondrial function, everything is going to get better, especially the places that need the most mitochondrial support.
Super interesting. Would you say in general, you could dose at any time of the day, but dosing in the first half of the day might work better?
I usually have people start in the beginning of the day because it has these monoamine oxidase effects. So the mild norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin release. I could take it before bed and I have no problem. But some people will take it at 9:00 in the morning and feel like they're just flying until 5:00 at night or longer. And this is just with pure methylene blue. So some people are just hyper responders. And I find this to be the case. People that have better overall mitochondrial function and they're pretty well optimized, they'll find that pure methylene blue is just going to give them this bump. So we have a lot of athletes that use it for endurance, for recovery. I use it a lot in those capacities. And then for exercise, I have a couple clients that refuse to work out without methylene blue, actually, because it'll help them keep their heart rate up for longer when they're doing their various types of endurance or their phase 2 training or whatever it might be. Because again, you don't hit that wall as quickly if you have methylene blue around, because there's still going to be something like oxygen in your cells working, which is the methylene blue working as like your final electron acceptor of like oxygen would. So a lot of our marathon runners are using it and a lot of our other endurance athletes as well. So they'll actually use a combination of our methylene blue products, pure ones, the Just Blue and the Tro Plus, along with our blue cannatine, which is what I was initially talking about as our first product at Transcriptions, which is our combination of the methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, which is great for focus and exercise boost and really just gets things rolling. It's got that stimulating capacity, but the methylene blue in there is very supportive. Remember, because methylene blue can act like an antioxidant at the same time. It's just a very versatile compound and scary for people too, because I know it's not something that comes from the ground per se, but we don't live in a natural world anymore. We live in a synthetic world, and sometimes synthetic things are really helpful along that path. And I've just found clinically over the years, Krista, that it is just so profoundly helpful. I can just think about 5 patients off the top of my head, one with a traumatic brain injury that was just having a really hard time recovering. And we just slowly started increasing the methylene blue and his brain just turned back on. He was just so grateful because he'd been doing this for 3 years to try to get better. Yeah. I had another lady with severe joint pain post-COVID and everything. And then finally she tried methylene blue and 3 days later, her pain was gone and she was back to work. It was just insane. Another lady with really bad mold that had gotten better from the mold, like the mold was gone in her system, but her mitochondria just were trashed
Mm.
because of having mold exposure for such a long time. So we gave her Methylene Blue. And again, the same thing. For her, it took a little while to find the right dosing. But once we got to about 16 milligrams, that's when things just started shifting for her. Her brain was just, she was no longer having that fatigue in the morning that was making it really difficult for her to wake up. Her concentration was better. So I've just been really impressed overall. But the hope, of course, in all these capacities is that we can help revitalize the system with diet, with lifestyle, with nutrition, with vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. And so Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, the nonprofit, and then the practice that I have that's based on that is looking at foundational biomarkers and doing all that work. And then the goal, of course, is to take people off of things like Methylene Blue unless they have more stress on the system, which I could argue is a lot in normal people. Even if you're going on an airplane, if you're not sleeping good the night before, or not sleeping well because you have children, there's a lot of reasons we all have stress. But my goal with most of my patients as well is to get them off of these products as much as I can and just use it more targeted. But in the beginning, it might require more constant therapy to see the benefit.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about high doses. If you're trying to use that for an acute infective purpose, maybe you could tolerate more. 1 milligram per kilogram up to 3 milligrams per kilogram. Earlier, you were talking about a 0.5 milligram per kilogram, but then you just mentioned this woman being on 16, I think, milligrams, which is not very much. So talk about the low dose dosing, because you mentioned, I think, increasing every 3 days. So just let's talk about the low dose dosing.
Yeah. So what I was alluding to is that we found a lot of benefit in dosing of less than 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. And that can start off as a benefit as low as 4 milligrams in some people. For example, I've seen it significantly in especially younger kids that are working with practitioners or that are my patients as well. You can use it in younger kids and see significant benefit at these very low doses. When it comes to low dose, 4 milligrams is a low dose, very low dose, but it can be significantly beneficial. But what I will typically do is that I'll increase the dose every 3 to 5 days. So 4 milligrams to 8 milligrams to maybe 12.5 milligrams to 25 milligrams in that order. So sometimes it's 4, 8, 12, 16, then 25. It just depends on the person. But I try to do it relatively fast, but not super fast. It really depends on the person. If they're super sensitive to everything, then I'll start off at 4 milligrams, then I'll wait 7 days. This also plays into the delivery system that we have at prescriptions, which is called the buccal troche that we've been describing. So a buccal troche is a dissolvable lozenge that goes between your upper cheek and gum, and it dissolves over about 15 to 30 minutes typically. And the nice thing about a buccal troche, there's a couple nice things about it. The first is that it bypasses what's called first pass metabolism in the liver, which is a detriment to the bioavailability of many different compounds. But one exception to that actually is methylene blue. Methylene blue, the bioavailability of methylene blue, whether you use it as a troche or you swallow it, is almost 100%, which is actually pretty crazy. It's pretty unusual. Most supplements, a common example would be something like NAC and acetylcysteine. That has about a 10% bioavailability. So you take 100 milligrams of it, you get 10 milligrams in the body. Okay. But with methylene blue, almost 100% is bioavailable. But buccal troches are great for ingredients that have a bioavailability that's going to degrade through first pass metabolism, which is most of the other ingredients out there, including the ones in our other products, some of our products. So number one, it bypasses first pass metabolism. And number two, it is faster, right? Because if it's going to dissolve between here, your upper cheek and gums, it's going to dissolve directly into the venous system of your cheek mucosa, which is extremely vascular. And you're going to start seeing an effect within about 15 to 30 minutes. So that's great, especially if you need focus now. You need anxiety relief and some of the other things that we have. The challenge with methylene blue, though, is that it's extremely blue. We talked about it being a dye. It is a very blue dye. So if you dissolve it, your mouth is going to turn blue. And depending on how much methylene blue you put in your mouth, the longer it's going to turn blue. Not everybody wants a blue mouth. I completely understand that. However, if you have a chronic complex medical illness or conditions that have been going on for a while, we have found that dissolving in the mouth is better overall. Oh, the other thing about troches that I forgot is that the troche it comes scored, which means that it's got the capacity for you to cut it up into little quarters. So it's got it's a square that you can cut up into quarters. So you can take a quarter, you can take a half, or you can take a full. And then depending on your dose, you can titrate that dose up slowly over time using a quarter, half, or full. With Methylene Blue, our Just Blue, and our Tro Plus, what I would say here is that most people are swallowing it, and that's okay because they don't want a blue mouth. The onset of action is just going to be slower. If you swallow it, it's going to be maybe 30 minutes to 60 minutes, sometimes longer on an empty stomach. If you dissolve it in your mouth, it's going to be about 15 to 30 minutes overall. The higher doses of Methylene Blue, especially anything above 16 milligrams, should be swallowed for sure, because that's going to make your mouth blue for a couple of days if you do that. Anything more than that, 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, that's going to be, your mouth is going to be blue for several hours. You can do this. We have a couple of remedies for that are posted on our website if people are looking at that. But in general, the nice thing about Methylene Blue is that it's so highly bioavailable, you can take it either way. It's just about how fast it's going to be the onset of action.
Yeah, cool. That answered all of those questions, because we've done some on liposomal delivery and similar, right? It's faster, but they'll get much higher with liposomal. Whereas here, it looks like it's going to be the same regardless.
For Methylene Blue, yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the challenge with a lot of the products out there is it's very difficult to know exactly what you're getting in your dosing.
That was one of my questions also. Comparing these troches, is that what it is? Because I call it
troches. Yeah, yeah, we call it troche. Yeah.
In my brain, I got it already programmed in my brain. You say it?
No, troche is the other way people say it, so it's all good. Yeah.
Okay, got it. I think about this delivery method versus liquid, and liquid would still be 100% bioavailability if there's actually what people say is in it, which is the question with every single supplement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a clinician. There's 4 docs on my team at Transcriptions, and we all really cared about quality. We all really cared about purity and potency. And we've done testing with other products on the market. Okay. And none of them, maybe except one that we checked, actually lived up to label claims in their droppers that they said were a certain amount of Methylene Blue. And that's not surprising to me, because if you put Methylene Blue in a liquid, it's going to concentrate in it's just not going to be completely homogeneous in that liquid, and you're not going to know exactly how much you're getting. So most of them were underdosing. A couple were overdosing overall with the liquids that we checked. The cool thing about the troche is that the form itself is done in a way that everything's homogenized, and then the troche is always going to have the exact amount of ingredients that we say it's going to have in there. So if it has 16 milligrams, it says it on the label, that's what it has in there. And that's something we test every batch to make sure that's the case. And we throw out, unfortunately, more than I'd like to when it doesn't meet our claims and it doesn't meet the specs that we wanted to make. And that's very unusual for supplement companies to self-regulate like that.
For sure. And you covered so many of my questions about Methylene Blue. We talked about where it comes from, the dosing, honestly, at length. We talked about potential contraindications. One of my questions was about taking breaks. And like you said, your goal is to actually get people to a good place, but then get them off it, which I think is a really smart thing. Also, we talked about how it's got these antimicrobial properties, but also these almost antioxidant type properties where it also accounts for drainage and detox burden as well.
Yep.
The contraindications being primarily high blood pressure and maybe the fact that it's an antimicrobial to the gut. That's the concern. As far as longevity or even long-term research, what's the longest you've had or seen someone on Methylene Blue? Because that would be probably a really easy question that people would have. What happens if they just stay on these doses? Because that's the challenge with humans is, let me just keep doing this thing.
Yeah. So I've met, anecdotally at least, I've met people that have been on 2 milligrams per kilogram of Methylene Blue for 3 to 5 years. And they've had really no problems overall, but it's a risk versus benefit in that case, right? These people are using it for significant microbial reasons oftentimes. Will their gut flora likely take a hit as a result of being on that for that long? Yes, but will it be more beneficial because they're treating Lyme or Bartonella or chronic fungal infections or mold? Then the answer is it's a risk versus benefit. Now, with much lower doses, 4, 8 milligrams, 6 milligrams, 10, these are so low that I do think that they're very likely safe over the long term. I don't see a major benefit, a major detriment from being on them for long term. But I think that as with anything, if you can wean somebody off of this, is it likely a good idea and have them take breaks over time? Mm-hmm. So do I have patients that are on these lower doses for very long periods of time? Yes, I've had people on for years now, and they do great. I check their labs and they're doing okay, especially at these lower doses. So but my goal always, as I mentioned, is to wean patients off. And so I'll usually have people stay at a dose that works for them for 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the situation. And then at that point, we start trying to wean it down to maybe instead of 7 days a week, let's see if we can go to 4 days a week and see if we can get the same benefit. And if we can go to 3 days a week and see if we can get the same benefit and that kind of thing. Overall, I think the very low doses are very safe. The higher doses need to be monitored more carefully, but even those can be very safe over the long term if they're monitored carefully.
When you say monitored carefully with high doses, are there any lab markers that you've seen that change from high doses?
Yeah, I've seen some antioxidant deficiencies happen as a result of this, because what's happening is that you are forcing the body to produce more glutathione specifically over time. So you can see glutathione go down over time in patients that are on high doses. So they just have to be compensated for that by giving them exogenous glutathione or NAC if you give the precursors, for example. I have seen other markers of oxidative stress go up over time in people on very high doses. But in general, the low doses, you just don't see it. People do well overall. And you don't see their markers really change, at least anecdotally. This hasn't been done. We've had back in like the 1910s and 20s and 30s, you had people that were on very high doses of methylene blue for malaria. And these people did well for a very long time dosing wise. I'm pretty convinced that it's very safe for most people. These potential effects, I just think should be monitored because I think they may be not effects that you see immediately when you're taking it, like glutathione deficiency or oxidative stress that's going up. You may not see that for years and years after taking it at very high doses. So that's why they should be monitored over time.
Well, since it's synthetic, does it lose potency after being on the shelf for a while, or does it expire officially?
So yeah, we do see a decrease in the potency after about a couple of years. That's why our expiration dates are no longer than 2 years with all the methylene blue contained products for that reason.
Okay, cool. Man, you nailed a lot of my questions accidentally. They just filled in as we went. You covered a lot of kind of anecdotal evidence for a lot of conditions I was wondering.
I forgot Alzheimer's. I forgot
we didn't cover Alzheimer's. You mentioned briefly autoimmunity and some other things, but go back to Alzheimer's.
Yeah, just real quick on that is that there was a study that was done looking at 3 doses of methylene blue. One was 8 milligrams twice a day, one was 75 milligrams twice a day, and one was 150 milligrams twice a day. So 8 milligrams twice a day was the placebo group. This is the one that wasn't supposed to have any effect, okay? Mm-hmm. But they wanted everybody's urine to turn blue because that is the other side effect of taking methylene blue. And as a result, they had to give them some, right? So they gave them 8 milligrams BID. The group that did the best in that study, the 8 milligrams BID. Mm. The other 2 groups didn't do as well. And I think the reason why is that the brains of an Alzheimer's patient is already under significant stress. And you're giving them a high dose of methylene blue that's forcing the body to create more hydrogen peroxide, forcing the body to increase their glutathione production, which it may not be able to do, especially if it's if it's a brain that's under significant stress already. So that's why I think, and that's why actually we developed the dosing of just blue at 16 milligrams, because it was equating to the dose that was in that study that saw benefit. And we've been very happy, and it's been a great experience to use that dose for so many people. But some people do need the higher doses, the 50 milligrams. And this is why we created the Tro Plus Blue, which is just for practitioners. And we have, at Transcriptions, we have a full practitioner portal. If you're a practitioner, you can go to transcriptions.com and go to the practitioner link and sign up. And we have webinars that I've done on all of our products, including Methylene Blue, interviews with clinicians that are using it in clinical practice, and clinical resources on dosing and various other things you can give to your patients as well. So I would encourage people that are interested, that are clinicians that are listening, to take a look. But the 50 milligrams can be really helpful too for some of these more acute things and for the more significant chronic things that require higher doses. But again, as I mentioned earlier, if it's a significant chronic thing, titrate. You got it.
Yeah. You don't want to be causing die-off. You bring up a point that we didn't talk about because we talked about dosing first thing in the morning, but in their study, they were doing it twice a day. Mm-hmm. Do you think a lot of times it is okay to divide things? Do you think it really matters? Or do you just do it once in the morning?
What I'll typically do is I'll start off with once a day. And then because the half-life of methylene blue orally is about 4 to 6 hours, so 4 to 6 hours. If people say, that's all great, doc, in the morning, but about 1 or 2 o'clock, I started feeling like I was going back, then that's usually when I'll dose them twice daily. I'll have them do a dose in the morning when they first wake up, and then about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. Where can people learn more? You've mentioned it, but if someone wants to follow you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, so our website, our company is called Transcriptions. It's the word troche and the word prescription mashed up together, so Transcriptions, okay? And it's transcriptions.com. It's also on Instagram at Transcriptions. My personal Instagram is at Dr. Scott Sherr. DRSCOTSHERR. So I do a lot of posting there as well. Those are the major locations. We also have the nonprofit called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice. The website there is homehope.org. And it's a nonprofit, like I said, and it's a 7-module certification course. The first module is something called metabolomics, which is a focus on cellular metabolism, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, cofactors. And we run cohorts twice a year, typically, where students can go through and learn metabolomics, which has been called the 21st century equivalent of a stethoscope, basically. So very cool. I really use it robustly in my clinical practice a lot. And then I integrate Methylene Blue along the process as I'm optimizing somebody's cellular metabolism and their gut function, et cetera. I think those are the major places. And then, if you're a practitioner, as I mentioned, you can go over to our website and sign up to be for our practitioner portal. You get access to practitioner discounts along with resources, as I mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today. I look forward to doing HBOT in a future episode.
Let's do it. Love to.
Just keep breaking.